Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and friends visiting us from home on Zoom. Welcome to Lakewood City Council Study Session Agenda for this Monday, August 14, 2023. And I feel like I'm in an echo chamber, so we might tone down the sound a little bit there.
But he has the other mic.
It could be it. Special. Okay, so tonight we have three items for discussion, the first of which is an abatement program update. And for this, we'll have our housing program manager, Mr. Jeff Gum. Come on up, Mr. Gum.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of the council. It is my privilege to be before you again, kind of bringing you up to speed with what the city's abatement program, dangerous buildings and nuisances have done over the last year and a half. So I hope to kind of show you some projects that we completed in 2022, go through some kind of quick facts and show you where we are today, show you some of our 2023 projects, and show you some of our priority projects that we're working on right now. So with that, I move on to the next slide, hopefully. Go. Forgot. Incorrect, it doesn't have those on. Yes, while we're bringing that up, I can kind of go through some of the highlights. So in 2022, we had pretty good compliance. In 2022, we did 23 abatement projects. 17 of those properties were completed by the owners. So we had a compliance rate of about 74%, which is fairly consistent year over year. There we go. In current program 2023, we've completed 11 projects. 10 of those have been completed by the owner. So this year we're looking at a 91% compliance rate. I assume that in the next 6 months, by the time we're done, we'll probably be in the 75 to 85% compliance rate once we move through our projects. So again, in 2022, we had a number of properties that had transient activity. There were 7 of them that we addressed. There was 4 properties that had structure fires. Of the properties, the 23 that we addressed, 10 were commercial and 13 were single family. Expenditures in 2022 were $1.529 million. We had a revenue of about $897,000.
Just a second, Mr. Gum, we got a few questions poking in here.
Perfect.
Mr. Branson.
Mr. Gum, what's the difference in the extent that something is abated when it's compared when it is abated and completed by the owner and done by the city? Was completed by owner get us to a more minimal level of abatement as opposed to if the evil city comes in, it's a scorched church abatement.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. So it is the exact same level. So when we do an order, there's an abatement complaint and an abatement order, and the order stipulates what is to be done. So either the owner completes what's in the abatement order or the city completes what's in the abatement order. So it is in essence the exact same level of work. Another good question. No, what we have seen is a lot of the properties that we've done abatements on, and in 22, the city completed eight of those properties. So we typically send at completion, we'll send a letter to the owner and kind of tally the expenses for the project and request reimbursement of those expenses. about 85% of the time, they'll reimburse us for those expenses. And if not, then we move on and file a lien on the property. So we do recover 100% of those costs plus interest.
Excuse me.
Your mic.
Yes, please use the microphone. Thank you.
So we don't start accruing interest until the latter stage of that, where there's a lien in place and it's running for some time. Okay, thanks.
Correct. The mic's not working. So in 2023, and I'll show you some of the trends in the next couple of slides. But again, I mentioned there was 11 properties that the city completed, or 11 that were completed, 10 by owners, 1 by the city. There was only 1 property with squatter activity. And so far this year, we haven't finished any properties that were associated with structure fires. Doesn't mean that we haven't had any. We just haven't gotten to the abatement of those structures yet. But the actual number of structure fires, although we've had a few lately, is still down. In 2023 to date, the city's expended $299,647 in abatement funds, and total revenue is $93,316. And in the slide that you can see in program status, there's 15 projects that we have currently pending, 10 dangerous building and 5 nuisance. Of those projects, there's 8 under abatement order and 7 that are pending in the queue. And actually, since I've put this together, there's a 1 project that was completed. I'll show that later in the process. So this is a map of the city of Lakewood abatements. There's completed in 2022 with the green dots, completed in 23 with the blue dots, and then the properties that we're either monitoring or under abatement order currently. And again, they're fairly consistently spread throughout the city of Lakewood. Some of the trends that I had noticed kind of since we started in 2015, they're right over your screen sharing is right over the top of it. But what that shows you is the orange line is kind of, there we go. Commercial multifamily property is one of the trends that I have been kind of tracking and noticing. So the commercial properties versus single family have been increasing in percentage as we've done abatements over the years. So last year we were getting to about 40% of the projects were commercial properties. This year we're looking at just over half of the properties so far have been commercial properties and fairly large scale commercial properties that we've been addressing. So that is something that we're continuing to monitor and anticipate that to continue. A good trend on that line is the red line, which is properties with fires. So again, it's been decreasing over the years. We've been able with code enforcement and police enforcement to kind of clear out some of the properties with squatters and keep them boarded up and vacant. So we've been able to not incur all of those fires that we have had in recent years. And again, squatters is something that we've seen an incredible downturn on. The squatters inside of properties have kind of fallen off. We're starting to see an uptake on squatters on properties. So there's a lot of camping and tents and so forth, as opposed to people taking up abandoned structures. And we have no movement in the slides. Oh, there we go. You just have to get near it. Oh, you'll scroll for me. Okay, so abatements of note completed in 2022. This is a commercial property, 8410 South Tacoma Way. The picture's on the left. It was kind of hard to see. I couldn't go past the fences when it was boarded off, but there was 5 single family homes and a commercial structure on this property. All of them were removed by the owner of the property. It sits as a vacant lot right now. Another property that we did, next slide, is 3407 86th Street South. This was a single family property. This probably had the most graffiti on a single family building I've ever seen. And literally, they painted over the windows, the door, I mean, everything. This thing was completely covered in graffiti. all kinds of debris. There were squatters inside this, so we were successful in getting the owner as well to demolish this property. It sits vacant now, and it's an improvement to that neighborhood. Next slide is 5408 Stilican Boulevard. This is the favorite property of the city manager. When I first met John, this was one of the first things that he said, we've got to get rid of this building. So we have removed this building. It was a property that the city actually abated. We were repaid fairly quickly thereafter, probably within the next 3 months. The owner repaid the city for this property. So it sits as a vacant lot today. Next slide is 9808 Lawndale Avenue. This was a nuisance property. So this was one of the ones that Sam Maloney was addressing when we were out. We happened to do a drive through the neighborhood, and we were looking at a different property that was dangerous down there, and came across this property, which had, I mean, you can see the garbage in the front. The backyard looked exactly like the front, only worse. So it was completely filled with garbage. We were able to address this property through the nuisance abatement process. All the garbage was cleaned up. The interior was completely cleaned up, and then somebody purchased the house, and it's subsequently been remodeled and turned back into useful service. Next slide is, there's a multiple slides here for 26, 21, 84. So this is the Carwan Mobile Home Park property that kind of goes back to code enforcement for quite a while, number of maybe say 10 or 12 years. So we've been working with this property. We finally got an abatement order on it when it got to this state. So this is a manufactured home, one of the ones that was on the property. The left slide kind of shows you the outside. The inside was completely gutted by someone going inside and stripping out the wires and the plumbing and so forth, and left it in this state. The next slide is a stick frame structure that was on the property. This was what used to be the community center. There was a laundry, and all of the electrical and everything went into this building, and it has extensive, or it had extensive water leaking into the structure and all kinds of garbage and debris behind it. Next slide. There's a slide on the left shows there was 3 illegal RVs that were moved on site. We had those boarded up and secured before they were demolished and removed. Some of the odd things that we removed on the park that we see often, they're kind of odd because they don't look like they're dangerous, but on the right, you can see an awning that was installed on one of the units. And that awning stuck out about 12 feet. It was supported by 2x4s and corrugated roofing and 2x4 framing that was overspanned. So what happens is, in the state of Washington, we get snow. Snow sits on a structure like this, and it's not built for a snow load. So what happens is it falls down, and whoever's underneath it either gets killed or extremely injured. So we had things like this removed when we were out on the site. Next slide is, there's a couple of buildings. The one on the left is an example of a carport that was demolished. There was 17 carports on the property that were dangerous. The owner addressed some of those, and some of them were torn down by the city. That is one of the ones that was torn down. The building on the right is another stick frame structure that was added onto multiple times. It's got an interesting roof design. You typically don't see a house built with a valley in the middle of it, because all the water goes into the house, which is what was happening on that thing. So it was deteriorating, had all kinds of structural issues, all kinds of modifications. That house was one of the ones that we tore down as well. Next slide. This is, again, you've got a carport on the right that was demolished and an awning. And then on the left, that was inside of one of the backyards of one of the units that we went in and cleaned up. So I won't say that's typical of the park, but there's 4 or 5 units that was typical of that we cleaned up. So the next slide, I believe, shows the actual getting close to cleanup. So this is one of the properties. So the picture that I showed you with the backyard was actually the unit on the left. So I was able to go around and take a picture from the backside. This is the front side of it. So on the left, and there's all kinds of storage of just everything under the sun. There was a huge amount of debris stored in this yard, just everything. When we showed up, the picture on the right was us showing up to remove. We had an abatement order to clean up that site and remove everything. So the owner decided to move everything from that site into the middle of the road. which is what you see in the picture on the right. So we ultimately removed all of those. It was all kinds of tools and garbage. I mean, just random things that were stored there. So all of that was removed. Next picture, our next slide is the backside of the unit when we were cleaning it up. So the one on the left is there's contractors there demolishing. There was a store, there was 3 storage sheds on there and all kinds of kind of shaddily built structures that were just kind of thrown together. The structure on the right, or the picture on the right, was a clean out of another unit. The tenants in there had literally brought in it's kind of an interesting thing. They go out every night and they bring new material in every single day. So every day I would show up, there was new things on site. So that washing machine was actually, it wasn't there the day before I got there. And I don't know how they got a washing machine in there. And there was multiple cars, just everything shows up on that site. So we were able to clean that up. I believe both of those sites the one on the left took 3 30-yard dumpsters and the one on the right took 2 30-yard dumpsters, which is pretty impressive when you consider between those trailers is maybe 20 feet by the depth of the trailer. So, I mean, it was just completely full of garbage and debris. Next slide is hopefully the after pictures. So that's the after the contractor cleaned up the lot and got it all graded. There was a single family house. The one that had that strange roof structure would have been in the picture on the right, and the clearing on the left would have been the brown common building that had the laundry and so forth. Those were all demolished and cleaned up. So the next slide is yes, a little bit of an update. So the same owner owns Carwan. He has, for all intents and purposes, kind of left it derelict. He's very difficult to get a hold of, does not respond to much of anything. I believe he's back behind on his taxes. There's some sewer issues, and he does not respond to his own property manager. So it's a potential for where that property could backslide and become an issue again. So code enforcement is monitoring it. Yeah, that's actually, yeah, you're correct. There is a sewer lien. We received notice, I think 2 or 3 months ago of a sewer lien. So.
Mr. Buer.
That same property owner has interest in other mobile home parks in the city of Lakewood. It's a constant monitoring issue. Of late, one mobile home park, he failed to pay for garbage. And so began to stack up, and then I was contacted and we made arrangements for pickup, and he did pay. So now that group is sort of organizing and trying to find a way of addressing ongoing issues, not only on the site with garbage, but there's a lot of elderly people on fixed incomes who are very fearful of non-compliance. He also failed to pay his electricity bill in December. And so we were out there, got the power turned on. So mobile home parks are a challenge. I'll just put it that way.
And not subject to our rental housing safety program. Should they be?
We are proposing some amendments to the rental housing safety program in the near future, and that would be one of the items I would ask the council to take a look at.
Yeah.
I would also tell you that we have, looking at what happened in Jamestown, we have a lot of illegal construction, and it's causing some significant issues with cleanup right now.
This slide is 3851 Stillicum Boulevard. This was the old Johnny's Market on Stillicum. Again, this was the worst graffiti commercial building that I've ever seen in the last probably 10 or 15 years. It went from slightly graffitied. It had been sitting vacant for probably 8 or 9 years. The owner took care of it for probably the first 5 or 6 and then let it completely fail after that. And it completely was covered with graffiti and starting to fail. So we were able to, in the next slide, you'll see we were able to get the owner out onto the property. And he had an excavator that one of his friends came out and demolished his building within probably 2 or 3 weeks of our notification to him to have that removed. So that was, it's kind of nice and fairly quick compliance on that property. And it sits as a vacant improvement to the Stillicum Boulevard, Durango neighborhood. The next slide is 14421 Woodbrook Drive. I wish I could have got a better picture, but the sun was kind of right in front of me when I took it. So this is what used to be an old restaurant in the Woodbrook neighborhood at the very southeast corner of Woodbrook. There's what used to be, there's a grocery store there, a little convenience store, and what used to be a restaurant. So it had a structure fire, squatters living in it. Ultimately, we issued an abatement order and the owner removed that as well. Next structure or next slide would be 9616 Gravel Lake Drive Southwest. I think all of you are aware of this structure. It sat vacant. We had an abatement order process that we did in 2017. The owner brought it mostly into compliance. There were some issues inside that were never addressed that we were working with him to address. The next slide is what you can see happened. He failed to address them and the building ultimately burned down and the city demolished it. One of the things that I found very interesting is Pierce County takes a little bit of time to move on the assessor's website to put things up, and when properties sell, it usually takes a little while. The very day that that building caught on fire, that picture was the parcel site photo. I was amazed that, I mean, literally within an hour, Pierce County had posted the fire picture of the property. I thought that was interesting. So somebody over there was moving quickly. So that property again it's been abated and we do have an abatement lien on that property. Abatements completed in 2023. So kind of show you some of the projects we finished recently. Again, Car1 Mobile Home Park, we did the demolition and cleanup of dangerous structures. We also installed sewers. There was 17 units with failed septic systems. They were backing up onto the property, on top of the ground, all over the place. So we went in and installed sewer mains, connected to the sewer main and installed a side sewer line and connected up all of those units. So this is some photos of the installation. Next slide, I believe, is completed. So when we were finished, the contractor put everything back together, did some nice paving for the site, and it actually was probably a substantial improvement to what they were used to. It's again, when we finished, it was a beautiful park. Next slide is 8104 to 8106 South Tacoma Way. It's kind of hard to see, but you can, on the left side, there's what looks like a brown building, and in the middle, it's the right slide, it's gone. Something that we're starting to see a little bit more of is a storage container. Somebody had converted a storage container into a single family home and placed it on this site. And this is a commercial zone parcel, so it doesn't actually allow for a residential use, and not to mention a commercial container that was converted without permits and legally posted on the property. So again, this is one that we posted an order on. This is actually one that we coordinated with Rental Housing Safety Program. That's how we were made aware of it. And then it was removed subsequently by the owner. There was repayment of small amount of funds. There was no lien on that property. Next slide is 7004 Cherry Lane Southwest.
Wow.
It's kind of hard to capture, and this is off of Stillicum Boulevard, kind of over by what is the Prince of Peace Church, I think is where it is, fairly close to that. So this is when I see the slide, I always think of fences make good neighbors. The only thing that doesn't make good neighbors is when you put up a fence and you fill the inside of it with just trash and garbage and debris. And that the slide on the left barely does justice to what was in this individual's yard. It was 4.5 feet deep over his entire yard. It was just completely full of just everything that you can imagine, scrap, debris. It took him a lifetime to fill this up. So we were able to address that through myself and code enforcement officers, primarily code enforcement officers were able to follow up with the owner multiple times and get him to be in compliance.
Fine. Dumping prohibited.
Yeah, it does say dumping prohibited, which was kind of ironic. You can't dump on the outside of the fence. You can dump on the inside of the fence. So this is 133rd Avenue South right-of-way nuisance, something that I haven't necessarily shown council that we do. Code enforcement does a lot of projects like this and we don't necessarily kind of highlight them. So I wanted to show you what code enforcement does. That's not necessarily a dangerous building, but it's a huge impact to the community. So on 33rd Avenue South, there was a number of vehicles that were parked along apartment complex. So when rental housing staff went out and did an inspection, this was one of the things that we noted because they were tenants' cars. So we worked with the apartment owner as well as code enforcement to get this thing cleaned up. There's a slide on the left. You can see there was about 8 or 9 vehicles. Most of them were up on blocks. They were either being worked on or full of just debris, all kinds of stuff stored in the road. And within about 2 months, code enforcement was able to get all those removed, and they have not come back to this day, which is a very good thing. So that made a huge improvement in the neighborhood. This is very close to 33rd Avenue South. It's very close to EFN, so fairly high profile address. The clicker is working, maybe. Another property that we were able to abate, 1440 Union Avenue. In the left slide, there's a yellow kind of little structure there that was an old barber shop. And that has, until very recently, had been sitting vacant for probably 8 or 9 years. It continued to dilapidate, and ultimately we got the new owner to demolish that. And that came down maybe a month and a half ago. So active abatements, this kind of goes through some of the current priorities for us. So this is one that I was mentioning. We had one property that was completed. So 10408 to 10410 112th Street Southwest. This sits just east of St. John Bosco Church. So this was a duplex that had at least 20 cars that would continually change. The owner or the person that was renting the space closest to this photo would go out and somehow obtain vehicles. Some of them were stolen. I don't know where they all came from. And he would strip them down in the yard and proceed to leave everything out there. And whatever he did with them, a few weeks later, they would be gone and there would be a new vehicle that was being stripped in the yard. So code enforcement worked on that property for quite a while. We were able to get an agreement with the owner to abate it. And on Friday, the contractor fully cleaned that property up. There's no abandoned vehicles. There's no garbage. There's nothing on that property. So I know the neighbors across the way, which live very, very close, were extremely happy. Some of these photos I think I've shown council before. So this is one that we're still working on, 7407 to 7409, 7409 146th Street. So this is in the Woodbrook neighborhood again. There was a few structures on this property. 2 of them have been demolished. There was all kinds of debris, vehicles and trash and garbage, and probably one of the filthiest properties that I've ever seen, with just the sheer amount of debris. This picture is actually taken after, I think there was 5 storage containers full of garbage were removed. So I mean, this is actually clean. A view from the back of the property. And again, you can kind of see where it looks like it's clean ground and dirt and so forth, that was completely covered. So they were in the process of cleaning things out when I was out there. What it looks like today, it's fenced. There's a single family house that remains. The owner is demolishing that. They're developing it into a multifamily apartment complex. It's got, I think, 4 or 5 buildings are going to be going in with multifamily units. It's kind of hard to see, but in the back of the slide, you can see what looks like burnt grass. So the new owner had sent somebody out there to mow the property down, and they mowed everything down in the front, but by the time they got to the back, their mower caught on fire and it actually burned out all the grass in the back of the property. It's not what caused the recent fire that affected Jamestown Mobile Home Park, but luckily the fire department was able to get there and put it out before it traveled. The property directly next door to the house that I just showed you, 7319 146th. This is a property that has had multiple structure fires. So that's a duplex that's completely burned out on site. There's a structure to the left that's kind of hard to see. There's a structure to the back that's a storage building that is painted in graffiti. There's 2 trailers in the back. There's another structure in front of that. So there's 7 structures on that site that are all vacant, boarded up, squatters, multiple fires and issues. The power's been disconnected and so forth. So there's nothing there for anybody. And the owner is in the process of testing those for asbestos, and realistically in the next 30 days, those should all be down and removed and the site cleaned up. So that one's moving along quickly. It's been a huge trouble property in the city. Another one that we're working with, the building official and I inspected this property, which is 4914 115th Street Court Southwest, Melody Apartments. One of the tenants, when a rental inspection was requested, showed photos to my staff of the fire damage to this building. And it's one that I remember there was a fire, but one of those things that happens, and building department was working on it, code enforcement was working on it, and then it went vacant for a long time. And the next time we went out to the property, it looked like a brand new finished building. So when we were out there inspecting and saw the photos, I brought the building official in and we met with the owners, and I'll kind of go through what we had. So the building isn't actually curved, but that's unfortunately, I don't know, my photo's curved. So this is a picture of the fire and West Pierce fire in the building. So the back of the structure on the top had 2 units that caught fire, burned holes through the roof, windows, doors. I mean, it was a fairly extensive fire inside. The deck on the back was extensively damaged, the siding. There was a bunch of work on the inside. So what it looks like is there's new railings, new siding, new windows. I mean, the place was completely redone, because this is what it looked like when I did inspection of it previously for rental housing. So we went from a building that was in this condition to one that had a fire and was completely redone without permits. So this one is currently being redone. They're doing engineering and uncovering all of the fire damage and redoing that with the building department. So fairly extensive remodel on this building, 16 units of apartments. Fairly small property. There's 2 of them that are owned by the same owner. So this is 9646 Bridgeport Way. We're doing a nuisance abatement. The other one, I'll discuss them at the same time for you. So the other one is 9668 Bridgeport Way Southwest. So these were rental housing inspection properties. We went out and there was a number of life safety issue where bedroom windows don't open. There was no smoke detectors. I believe both of these have garage additions that are failing. They have washing machines that discharge right out onto the ground in the back of the property. There's the plumbing it's not even connected. So I mean, there's a number of life safety issues in these properties, and we tried to get the owner to fix them. And he left them as they were for about 8 months, and being life safety issues at some point in time, the city has to get something done. So we posted nuisance orders on these properties, and the owner has since obtained permits and is getting them fixed. So sometimes you have to help them along. A commercial property that we're working on right now, again, this is another one of our priority properties, 10615 Bridgeport Way. So this is what used to be the old Napa building. It's been kind of in and out of vacancy for the last year and a half. The back of the structure, as you're looking at photos, is there's a bunch of graffiti and there's a lot of water damage. You can kind of see a little bit of where there's a door on the left side of the photo, and then directly above the right side of the door, you can kind of see the siding. It's kind of waffling a little bit. So basically, you'll see the photos on the inside. It's completely water damaged. The roof structure is incredibly compromised. So this is the inside photo of there, and you can see a hole through to the outside. So all of the framing along that back wall is completely rotten. The roof structure is completely rotten and failing. It's got multiple additions. The owner's working to get this thing fixed. Another photo of the ceiling. More photos of the ceiling. So the owner had a structural engineer go out and assess this building, and the structural engineer came to the same conclusion that we did. It's at extreme risk of failure. He needs the owner in his letter to shore this thing up and brace it up so it doesn't fail in the interim while he's fixing it. So we're working with the owner to, one, shore it up so it doesn't fail, and two, repair it or tear it down. What it was used for last, and the reason we were out there, is there was an illegal use of a motorcycle repair shop. So zoning didn't allow for a motorcycle repair shop. So unfortunately, that tenant was asked to leave and has since relocated. I believe he owns a motorcycle repair business in Auburn, and he just went back to his original location. This was a second business for him. So that is the abatement program. If you have any questions or any thoughts.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Gum. I was looking at your map of all your abatements last year and this year, and I saw one for this year on Pack Highway, and I didn't see that in the list. So I was wondering if you could help with that.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost, there it is. So that little blue dot right in the middle of the screen.
That crosses over the tracks, so it's right by there.
Now it sits on the corner of,
There's two. Yeah, and so it was on Pack Highway. I don't see on that one. And glasses, because I've been here for too long and I can't read anymore. That one might have been, Pacific Highway 1, 2. I don't know why that one is not on. Oh, it's in my presentation, but it's not necessarily on the slides that I showed you. That's 12314 Pacific Highway Southwest. So that's what used to be the old Tactical Tailor. It was a 2-unit commercial structure that there were squatters in, and it was completely stripped. So I didn't necessarily show you any photos of it because it wasn't there wasn't a lot of work that we had to do. The owner basically just cleaned it up a little bit, put a fence around it, and addressed a couple of things with building permit issues. And it's back to potentially being used as a structure that is legal again.
Mr. Buer had a comment.
Yeah, if you're talking about the one building with all the washing machines and other appliances out front, that's technically not an abatement. And that's been something that code enforcement has been handling as a multiple code enforcement issues. We've had issues with fencing, the equipment on the outside. There's been lots of tickets and so forth. I don't think that we've taken it to a public nuisance level yet. I know that we worked on it before in the past and got it cleaned up, and then it comes back.
Yeah, that building is directly the one that you're referring to with the appliances are directly next door. So it's just to the west of it. And I would say the building official deals with that building at least once or twice weekly. Wow. Trying to get the owner to comply and bring all the issues with appliance storage back into compliance. So it may end up being a nuisance property very, very soon if he continues to do that.
I think some people are there. You might.
I think some people are there overnight too, occasionally. So that could be another thing. And that's the appliance one, not the one that's
Yeah.
separate. Because I believe Councilmember Laura Sell and I are talking about the two properties that are side by side, correct? Yeah,
That's correct. The old Tactical Tailor also used to be a dry cleaning establishment.
right.
Uh,
And so when you say that
but-
it's completed, that just means it's gone through the abatement process and the building is still there. We don't know what's happening with it.
The old tactical Taylor, it's gone through the process. It had all of the deficiencies from a building and a code perspective addressed. So it had some windows and so forth that were removed and some structural changes. They had a structural engineer address those. Building department signed off on all of those. And at this point in time, it sits as a vacant structure that meets code. It's just not occupied.
Mr. Branstetter?
Thanks, Mayor. Mr. Young, you know, recently we had the fire in Woodbrook that destroyed homes in the Jamestown mobile home park and threatened the multifamily development that is, I think, a Pierce County housing development on the other side. And the fire was essentially contributed to by a property that didn't have any structures on it, but that hadn't had vegetation managed very well to be able to go and do that to the point of where it became a dangerous property. To do that. But and there are some other properties like that in the city, in other areas of where there's an owner, it's vacant, the vegetation has gotten excessive and dry. Okay, so in a situation like that, is that simply a code enforcement issue, or given that it can't be allowed to go on for a long period of time without risking some serious safety issues, is going in and dealing with that vegetation an allowable abatement strategy?
Yeah, that's actually a good question and quite timely. So it is considered a public nuisance under 8.16. So any vegetation over 18 inches that's improperly maintained or overgrown. I mean, it's in our code specifically as a public nuisance, and it can go through the abatement process. What we try and do is work with code enforcement first. So we'll have code enforcement go out and make contact with the owners, hopefully get them into compliance, send them usually a notice. If they don't comply, there's usually a series of tickets that are done before we would do code or do the nuisance process on it. The kind of the fine line that we walk with nuisances and abatements is, in order to get an abatement order, we end up having to go before a judge at Pierce County Superior Court. So it's important to remember that, one, we've got to bring properties into compliance, but two, some of the judges that we've been dealing with it seems as if they're not necessarily so much in favor of some of our properties that we've been bringing, and we've had a lot harder time getting abatement orders. There's a lot more convincing and kind of instructing, teaching the judges kind of what the process is so they understand what we do. And I worry about not necessarily taking just a property that has overgrown vegetation, but if you have a continued number of abatement properties that the judges are going to look at and go, really, you want to remove some blackberries, or you want to do some of this, you kind of run the risk of kind of going down the wrong side of the path with some of these judges, and maybe they start ruling not necessarily in our favor. So it's important when we do, typically we'll use a property, and most of them have dangerous and nuisance structures or squatters, or we try and tie it together, not necessarily just, hey, your property's overgrown, but hey, your property's overgrown and you've got garbage, and hey, you've got this, and then you've got some of these other things to kind of rise it to a level where a judge can fully understand really what a nuisance process is. So there's a little bit of that fine line, but those properties with all the issues that we're having with wildfires and some of the other things going on, they are starting to rise and become a priority for us now to address. So code enforcement's going to start addressing a lot of those probably more proactively, especially as things continue to dry out.
Well, I think that we've recently heard from the fire chief that the number of brush fires or fires on property like this is risen significantly the past 2 years over what it was before. Where, we've seen the extreme of what such a property can result in, and reliance upon that the fire department will somehow stop these fires before they impact structures and lives is not 100% certainty to be able to do that. It's also true, and I understand that we got processes that take time. And so finding a property that's been neglected to where it's dangerous like that, in July, it doesn't really do us any good to embark on a process that'll allow us to take care of that dry vegetation in November. But I guess that I would say that there is some sort of a question as to whether there is something via ordinance that we could do to create a special category of nuisance that is more immediately actionable in some way. And I don't know, how you legally craft that, of where we can look at doing that. I mean, in addition to the problem at Jamestown and the many fires West Pierce has had, we had the nearby fire along 72nd Street, this in Tacoma, and just outside the city, that just happened, and we had those things to go on, and I can think of, or could find of a number of properties in the city that are in that situation of where there's just tall, dry vegetation on them, and they're in the midst of or in the close proximity to residential areas, being able to go and do that. So it would be good to have a tool that, staff, whether it be your staff or the code enforcement people, could use with some rapidity as we get into the dry summer months to protect the community, to do that. And if we don't have it, we're maybe needing to look ahead to next summer about what do we want to have in place to be able to go and do that. If there is a proposal that would be an additional tool that might help. If you could give that some thought or inquire on with how other communities maybe have something that is workable to do that. But I think it's an issue that begs being addressed. I think abatement is one avenue to look at, and code enforcement is certainly another, and going on. But thank you.
Well, on that point, on the vegetation issue, we already have an ordinance in place, right?
Correct.
So it's just a matter of educating folks that if they see it, my Lakewood 311 is an opportunity to call it in to get some attention, I assume, right?
Yes.
And as people drive around the city, staffers, I assume that if they see something like that, they can also address it or report it in.
Yes.
Is there anything else we could be doing, to Mr. Brandstetter's point? Other than that, we already have the ordinance. It sounds like we just need to educate folks on how to actively report
Yeah,
issues.
I think that's kind of the thing. I mean, we've got to be very respectful of obviously personal property rights as well as public safety requirements. So I mean, it's from a nuisance standpoint, I would love to see a tool that we could address things more quickly.
People might be more receptive in this day and age where we got,
Yeah.
increasing heat in the summers and places like Lahaina burning to the ground and, Woodbrook having challenges. And I think there's a little bit of heightened awareness.
Yeah, I think there's an educational piece and maybe
Yeah.
now is the time to kind of get that information out there because
Mhm.
it's in the forefront of many people's minds.
Absolutely. Mr. Buer?
Yeah, I just want to be very clear with the council. This is a coordination issue too with the West Pierce Fire District.
Sure.
It's just not the city of Lakewood. I think maybe we'll talk about working a little bit more in coordination in the future.
What would be the coordination piece? So what West Pierce would it fit in?
They have their own fire inspectors. And they regularly go to various commercial properties. They're supposed to visit them on a regular basis.
So they would look at things like brush and that would be an
Yep,
issue
we
for
could
them.
just ask them to add that to the list. And so
Got
that,
it.
that way we have an idea of where we need to spend some time with.
Got it.
But as Lakewood develops further, you're going to see fewer and fewer lots.
Right. More asphalt, less weeds, as I say. One quick question on the abatement lien process. I know we have that abatement lien in place at the property on Gravity Lake Drive. So what has been our standard practice with regard to process? And maybe this is a city attorney question. How long do we let the lien sit before we elect to take action to foreclose the lien in order to realize on our investment and get those monies back to be put into the system to do further good work?
So it's driven by I believe it's an RCW. So Pierce County assessor is the place that we file liens through. They have a 3-year process before a property falls into foreclosure. So
On the tax side,
on the tax side. So once it gets to that point, they notify the owners that it's in tax foreclosure. I believe there's a very short window for them to repay and then it goes
so
into
an abatement lien
foreclosure.
is treated like a tax lien for foreclosure purposes?
It is. We
Okay.
are above all other
Got it.
liens on the property. So
Okay,
sewers and taxes and so forth. So it is a nice vehicle for us to recoup our expenses. We're first in line and typically the county, once the property goes into foreclosure, they do I believe it's a May or June
May.
foreclosure. And then they do a November, December, somewhere along those lines. So it's 2 times a year.
okay. Got it. Did you have a comment on that, Ms. Walker? I saw an ooh.
Mr. Gum is one of our easier in-house clients.
Good. All right, very good.
I don't know if Eileen would agree with that.
Yeah, maybe not, exactly. Any other information to impart or any other questions of Mr. Gum?
No, I think it's a wonderful process. I mean, I think we're starting to see the benefits of the abatement program. I mean, there's not as many, it's kind of hard to go around and find dangerous buildings and derelict buildings. I mean, that's kind of what I do when I'm driving around. I'm trying to
Right.
find them and it's improved dramatically. So it's a great project.
So we appreciate your work on it. Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, and Mr. Gum, I think that your work has been making a difference over time for a considerable number of years. And it is one of the things that we don't often point to as one of the advantages and promises kept about incorporating as a city as compared to prior to incorporation and how things were just allowed to go themselves to do that. But the work that you do is right up there with making the city a safer place, for the people that live and the businesses that have located here. And this is a program that doesn't get enough credit for the good that it does. And a lot of times, it's like you hand it with neighbors that are elated, but the community itself should be elated for some of the eyesores that are no longer here.
Well, because we enjoy having you around so much, we'll have you lead us through the next item on our topic list tonight, and that's the review of the funding allocation of the home funds and the home ARP funds in support of the Living Access Support Alliance project to construct 25 affordable units of housing on Gravely Lake Drive.
Okay, I will hopefully make this fairly quick and succinct. This is something that has come to council on 2 different occasions. It was reviewed originally by myself and about a month ago, we had the new executive director, Jason Scales, here before you all, and he was able to ask or answer some questions that you had of him and his project. So again, there aren't any changes to the funding request. It's a $1 million home ask and 1.17, just in excess of 1.175 million in home ARP. The only updates that I would have would be to the federal funding. So our lobbyist in Washington has kind of updated us to where that ask is, and Representative Strickland has taken that on and kind of pushed that along. It's been reduced to a $1 million appropriation in the THUD bill. So it's significantly less than what we started with, but the good thing is it's at least passed through that process. It does have to pass through the final budget review and then go through the House and the Senate. So depending on how that works, ultimately, we're very hopeful that it will be approved. We believe that it will be approved, but it's significantly reduced from what our original allocation request was.
Let me ask you this before I open it for questions. So if I understand the math correctly, it's a $10.5 million project, right?
Correct.
And we're doing the $1 million in ARPA funding conditionally, right? We've got the Pierce County funds, the states, that's $4 or $5 million plus another couple million with home and home ARP funding. So $7 million, maybe $1 million from the Fed, so that gets to 8 of the 10.5. What's the prospect from your discussions with LASA for them to seek commercial financing of the balance and get repaid over time with the reasonable rents that would be afforded this lower income project?
They are seeking additional funding for the project. I'm not certain if there's typically a little bit of wiggle room to put in a commercial loan, but usually with affordable housing projects, the rent is lower than what a typical market rate is. So the debt coverage ratios tend to be a lot different than you'll see in a
I'm thinking
typical.
2 million finance for a $10.5 million project's not bad.
Yeah. So it's a little bit more tricky. There's a few banks out there that will work with affordable housing projects and developments that understand them, but it's a little trickier to get conventional funding in those projects only because the cash flow is lower and the debt coverage ratios tend to be a lot lower than they probably would otherwise need to be. It is a possibility. I haven't really necessarily broached that in great detail. They were looking to have some foundational donations into the project. So they're hopeful that if they can secure different foundations to fund the project, then obviously the cash flow is a little better for the project, which ultimately ends up in better maintenance, better upkeep, a better project all in all in the end. And it does allow, I mean, the cash flow in these projects does allow for LASA to do different things, so.
Sure. And I wonder if there are any tax credits, housing tax credits available for something like this. I know there are in the.
Yeah, we just did, Pierce County, Lakewood and Tacoma do funding. We do common NOFA, Pierce County and Tacoma do anyway. So we went through those today. And tax credits, there's the 4% tax credit and there's 9% tax credits. And typically the county gets 9% tax credit a year.
Okay.
And we were looking at Mercy Housing is doing, I forget where they are, Aviva Crossing, Avista Crossing, I can't remember what it is. But they've got a fairly large 129 unit project that's going to be pushed forward through Pierce County and Tacoma for that tax credit for 9%. So that would be this year's 9% tax credit. The following year, there's another, I cannot remember the funder. I wrote it down. The other funder, I believe in 2025 that they would be looking to do, I think it's another Tacoma project. Bridge Meadows in Tacoma. So there'd be another 9% tax credit that would be coming forth in 2025. So realistically, if they're going to do a tax credit, it would have to be a 4%, which typically has a lower cap. There's a lot less money that you can get from those. And they tend to be a little bit more subscribed to. So there's a little bit more competition, but the 9% for all intents and purposes is really kind of a 3-year window for anybody right now.
Got it. And part of the funding recommendation is of the monies, 117 grand would go for administration, I assume, back to us as a fiscal agent of some sort to monitor and manage the project.
Yeah, most of probably 95% of that would be city staff
Right.
monitoring the project. There's a window where we have to monitor to make sure the affordability is maintained.
Which makes me feel more comfortable that we've got some oversight into that.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, Mr. Anderson, and then Mr. Branstetter.
Jeff, these units can cost $2,000 a month to maintain even without a real mortgage payment. Is this, I didn't get any feeling that there was anything firm with respect to the cash flow with respect to operations. Housing vouchers have multi-year backlog of people waiting to apply. The Pierce County Housing Authority can't get out, properly administer the vouchers it has. Where's the money going to come to sustain this?
There have been discussions with the Pierce County Housing Authority for housing vouchers, and they are planning on providing housing vouchers for this project. So I don't know where they come up with their vouchers, but they seem to be able to find vouchers when we need them. So some of the units will have housing vouchers. Some of them won't need them. Some of the 2 home ARP units, we have additional funding set aside with the $1.175 million. Some of those funds would be set aside for rental assistance for the clients in those units. So there would be cash flow for those units to offset basically the low rent. So they're at least getting back what would be a market rate home rent. So the cash flows in the project, while they're not great, they are sufficient to generate their operational reserves. They're sufficient to cover their operational maintenance and so forth. It was a reasonable budget that was put together. I looked at their rents. I looked at their escalation of costs for maintaining the unit, and their escalation of cost was higher than their rent escalation over the term of the project. So it's a reasonable budget when I looked at it. It's an affordable housing project that typically tends to be a fairly lean project, but the financing is there to make this project work.
And part of that is the city of Lakewood contributing money for rent.
Some of the home ARP funding would be used to, it's basically what would be as a project reserve. So you build the project with the $1.175 million, and over the 15 years of the affordability, basically, I'm trying to remember the rents for those units. It's no more than 30% of their household income can be used for rent. So typically those households are going to be very low income. So they may have a $300 or $400 a month rent, and typical rent for a 1 or 2 bedroom is about $1,200 or $1,300. So about $1,000 a month would be set aside in a reserve account to make up that difference for operations.
That would be a limitation on future home funds allocation by the city.
It wouldn't necessarily be a limitation on future funds. It would just be the home ARP funds that are put into the project. They would be set aside and unexpended until you need them every year. So every year they would draw down whatever the loss on that unit was, in essence, to cover it over the 15 years.
And indicated that Pierce County Housing Authority has committed vouchers. They say how many and where the source is going to be.
It's at their HCV, Housing Choice Voucher Program. We have not had I'm not involved in that discussion with them. So, but they have had a discussion and they have committed to funding units in that complex. I don't know if it's a full 25 units that they're committing to or a different number. I would have to get back to council on that.
Yeah, would you do that? Ask them if there's just a relocation of existing voucher holders or how they plan to do that. There's some temporary blip, I think, in housing vouchers, but I'm not sure that they have a commitment from the federal government for a long-term increase in the number of vouchers they have.
Yeah, I will do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Branstetter.
Mr. Gum, in your memo, there was a section under what is the loss of Gravely Lake Commons affordable housing development. And the first sentence of the second paragraph says this project will provide affordable housings with no supportive housing provisions or restrictions and will be solely managed and operated by LAHSA. That language sounds different than any language about this project that I've ever heard, because I've always been hearing about permanent supportive housing is what this project is. So is this a firm change in direction by the LAHSA board and the LAHSA's new executive director with respect to this project? And would it also extend into the existing 15 units at that site when they become LAHSA assets?
So there's always kind of it's difficult with all the different funding streams that are out there. So there's affordable housing, there's permanent affordable housing, there's a myriad of different types of housing and different funding sources that are out there. So this project has always been an affordable housing project. It was never supposed to be a permanent supportive housing project. So what permanent supportive housing does obviously is that you require supportive services for people in the projects. For home funds, you actually legally cannot require someone to be in a permanent supportive housing. They can't be required to have services. So the home funds don't actually allow that. The home ARP would be the same. So there's not a service requirement. Pierce County allocated ARPA funds to the project. So ARPA funds do not have a permanent supportive housing component as well. So permanent supportive housing it's neither good nor bad. It's just really expensive. So you have to have additional staff to provide services. Usually your in-house operational costs are going to be 2 to 3 times what they would be for just affordable housing, because affordable housing is you typically have a manager and you're looking to maintain units just from maintaining the structural integrity of the building and aesthetics and so forth. So it's always been a permanent affordable housing. And I'm not certain that I made it clear when we brought this project forward that it didn't have a services component. LAHSA appreciates that. They don't necessarily want to have additional staff hired to run an affordable housing project that's permanent supportive housing. So it may very well have been something that I didn't communicate very well earlier on. And it's not a housing first project either. So I mean, housing first is typically what goes through the coordinated entry system, and it's a first come, first serve. So with this project, LASA, they're in the driver's seat, so they get to pick their clients. They get to have whoever's in the units sign lease agreements with them. It's a very simplified funding project. With regards to the other 15 units, none of the rules and regulations for these funding sources would apply to those other 15 units. Once the agreements for those projects are up, and those had a 30-year term, I believe, when they originally signed them with the county. The city's term was a little bit less than that, but once those expire with the county, then it becomes whatever affordable housing project LASA wants to run there.
Okay, and again, I don't think that I was interpreting anything that you told us earlier about this being a permanent supportive housing type operation, okay? I kind of got that impression from the previous LASA executive director who was sort of an advocate for that kind of projects and gave that thing going forward. So with regards to the existing investments that when you talked about the investments in the project, and we have that going on, in your summary, you're not including the money the city also provided that helped with the purchases of those properties. So that's not included in the budget that is described in your memo. That's kind of a sunk cost that's already gone.
Correct, it is.
Okay, to be able to go and do that. And there are no other similar costs of a need to acquire real estate associated with this, that the loss is all firmly in an ownership situation of the land that's needed for this project.
Yes, it's firmly under LASA's control, and the property was recently rezoned to allow for this development.
Okay, and you know, and you mentioned a 15-year window and things to do that. Is there what sort of controls does LASA envision placing on the property or in there internally, so that as the property matures and that there is a turnover in tenants, that it continues to remain an affordable housing multifamily option? You know, how do they internally intend to do that? You know, Habitat for Humanity is like placing like a land lease on the property, so that the property can can increase in value all at once, but when an owner wants to sell it, they can only sell it for something, or they can only sell the building, they can't sell the land. But how does LASA envision doing that, or are they that mature in their thinking about it yet?
That's another good question. So we can establish kind of anything that, I won't say anything that we like, but we can kind of establish whatever we would like to ensure this property is maintained into perpetuity if council so chose. We have to, at the very minimum, meet program regulations. So when I was talking a 15-year term, 15-year term would be the home ARP. So that's the minimum requirement of affordability for home ARP. Home would have a minimum affordability period of 20 years. Pierce County has a minimum affordability period of 30 years for their home ARP funding. If we chose to go, and I don't know what our ARP funding affordability requirement is. That's something that potentially Tiffany Spear could answer. She's the ARP program manager, but we could in essence put any term of affordability on that building that we wanted. The only thing that I would say is it's important to kind of be cognizant of, as you were kind of talking about how Loss is thinking in the future of maintaining their building. If we end up with a longer term affordability and you end up with a building that's they typically, the way these work, you build them out 15 years from now, you kind of hit the top of the cycle. And the first 15 years is you're making money and there's not a lot of building maintenance. Year 15 to year 30 is, guess what, we're going downhill. Year 30, we've got a lot of maintenance to do. So if we end up with an affordability period that goes far into advance or into the future, one, it gives us the strength of making sure that it's maintained affordable and those units are used into whatever time frame we have. But in addition, you've kind of got the kind of downside where, okay, the city's making us maintain this thing for 40 years. So after our funding's gone in year 30, what are you guys going to do as a city for us in years 30 to 40 to help us maintain this building to make sure that it's an affordable building? So there's kind of that balancing act of how far do you want to go into maintenance, and habitats are a little easier. They do a 99-year ground lease because typically the owners are maintaining those buildings. So there's some skin in the game. They've got a reason to maintain those units, and most likely they are maintained a little bit better than a rental housing building would be.
And then my last thing, and I don't know if you're the right person to ask that, but I see one of the slides that Ms. Spear has shown us about where we have to get to. And there's a thing about we've got a plan for so much permanent supportive housing, so much affordable housing going on. So these units, when we are putting them in one of those buckets, they won't go in the permanent supportive housing bucket. They'll go into one of the buckets further to the right on that slide as we are looking at long-term to meet our 2044 planning things over there, and we should look at them that way. Lozano. Well, I think that we are fairly confident that the numbers that you gave us, the 1 million and the 1.7 million are going to be one-time costs to us if we commit to them.
Yes, they are.
Construction money, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a one-time construction budget.
Right, thank you.
Where are they on the section 108 loan that's owed on the first phase?
I just put that in my year-end report to HUD. They've paid it down to, I believe, about $475,000. I'll have to get the exact number, but they're right kind of in the middle of their payment schedule. So they've been on. They're current. They've been on time. They make a payment in February and they make a payment in August every year.
Okay. And I don't suppose there are other 108 monies that could possibly be used to fill this gap in part?
We could reapply for section 108 funds. I don't know if I would recommend section 108 anymore as much as I was in years past. They've added some extra fees to it. So one, the interest rate would be considerably higher. And then there's a 1% fee that goes on top of the programs and so forth. So it's kind of a last resort funding if there's nothing else that you can do. Typically is what I would say. It's for a commercial project where you're generating a substantial amount of revenue. I could see it, but on a affordable housing, unless you can literally come up with nothing else, then that could be a viable source.
Got it. Very good. Any other questions for Mr. Gum? Well, thanks again for your good work on this and the update. We appreciate it. Weaving through the morass of federal bureaucratic regulation is better in your camp than mine. Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, when do you anticipate the recommended actions that are in your memo coming as action items to the council?
Next week. Yeah, we need to talk about it, but it's scheduled for the 21st.
Okay, and are they scheduled as a regular agenda item or a consent agenda item?
It can be our pleasure. We can certainly put it on the regular, yeah, it says regular agenda, item 3. Mhm. I assume everyone still wants it on the regular agenda? Yeah. Because we may or may not be ready to. Let me ask Mr. Gunn before you ask the question.
Okay.
Is there a timing requirement for council action?
Not necessarily a short timeline right now. The only timeline that we're really on is Pierce County does have to commit funds to some sort of project.
Their ARPA
Within the
funds?
next 6 months, realistically. I would have to get their exact timeline, but they still have a little bit of leeway, but
Got it.
their ARPA funds have an expiration date as well. So, and I do know that it was within the next 6 to 8 months, somewhere in that time frame. I thought it was 2024 that they have to have something committed and approved, so.
Of course, it begs a question about whether they can be expended unless LASA gets the full 10.5 to construct the project, right?
Correct, but once there's a certain level of commitment, I mean, you can do a commitment letter to a project, and that's considered a commitment to a project. So depending on how long it takes them to get their funding together.
Yeah, we kind of keep walking around this whole thing. The Pierce County has $3.5 million of ARPA money. We have $1 million in ARPA money. It has to be, that project has to be off the ground by probably this time or September of next year. Or both us and the county have to pull out of it. Otherwise, the ARPA money will not be, we have to know that thing's going to go. So there's a time limit on this. We're really, what we're talking about is throwing another $1 million in, holding it for another year to see if this project can get off the ground. I'm not sure that it will.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not hearing tonight that they're making much progress. In fact, they're not going to get as much federal money. The state money is not, they didn't make a huge commitment. All we can do is wait. We've already, I mean, I feel like we keep having this debate on this amount, but we're straddled. Like at one leg, we don't want to be in the project. The other leg, we want to be in the project. And the question is we've already committed. You can't be half pregnant here, I don't think. Although arguably we could pull money, not give this money, and it would probably be the end of the project, I would think. And then we should start talking about the ARPA money. If we commit this money, we're all in. We've done everything we
It's got to
can
be
do.
committed by the end of 24, right? And then
Correct.
expended by 26.
But if they're not off the ground, the county will be, I guarantee you that $3.5 million will be gone.
When you say
Right.
off the ground, though, does that mean they have to?
They have to have,
Break
I would think our point of view on the $1 million, and I think it would probably be the counties too, is if they don't know that thing's going to get built for sure, they're going to be gone
By when?
end of next year. They have to commit those funds to a project.
Well, the end of next year will be 24.
Correct.
Yeah. So we could conditionally, put a date on here that if they don't have some sort of firm commitment for the full 10.5 by X date, that the council reserves the right, I assume, like we have the conditional $1 million to conditionally approve the home and the other allocated funds as well. Is that possible?
Yeah, and that's easy to put in a commitment letter. That happens with Tacoma and Pierce County all the time, that if, and actually we were discussing that in our meetings today, that Pierce County was applying or putting funds in a project and Tacoma said, well, that's great, but if for some reason it doesn't get done, they do the exact same thing. We're writing in a commitment.
Well, I think
that
they probably
gets us
appreciate
out.
our position because we can't just waste money.
Right.
And, yeah.
We got to move.
Right, we gotta reserve it for the highest and best use, and if theirs isn't gonna fly, we gotta know sooner than later so we can adjust fire.
And I think the last couple of million in this lending environment is going to be very difficult. Actually, I don't know that the money's out there right now.
Mhm.
I mean, they might prove me wrong and that in the public arena, maybe there are, but if it was a private deal, it probably wouldn't get.
They may
done.
have to come up with another funding partner, like they did with the first phase. Which was Tacoma Housing. On the first phase.
Oh, is that what they did?
Mhm.
So they're at least 2 million short.
Yeah, they're, I forget what the number is, rough about 2.5 million.
Mhm.
On honestly, when we sit in funders between Pierce County and Tacoma and Lakewood, there's a commitment, I think, on the Pierce County side to see this done as fairly significant. I mean, I think if they're not able to find private funding, I think potentially there's a way that they could get a 4% tax credit project with this, because I mean, they're realistically the projects they're looking at, there's some units that are going to be 30% that kind of look better on a 4% tax credit, and there's going to be a lot of units at 50%. So their chances of getting that are probably good enough where if that's the last resort, I think between Pierce County and Tacoma and Lakewood, because we typically get together with the boards that review the housing tax credit programs, and we put forward kind of our list of
Right.
projects that we want
And
funded.
and to
So
Mr. Boki's point, which is well taken, I assume that conversation and some sort of commitment could be obtained sooner than later, like mid-2024, so we know.
yes. Yeah, and I mean, that's the important fact. I mean, for the county, I mean, to get these projects committed, there is I believe it's June 2026 or whatever it is, 2025. I can't remember that. I should look at my ARPA stuff more closely. But there is a firm deadline that you have to have the projects finished and completed. And if you don't have that front end commitment to get things going, at some point in time, you kind of need to bail out of the project, because if you have to find another project, it's going to take a while to get one.
Do you know if Loss is engaged in soft cost work yet, architectural work, design work, that kind of thing? And if so, how are they funding that? Because that's part and parcel of the project, right?
Yeah, they have been funding that. We have not been reimbursing them for that. So they've been funding it on their own. They have an architect that they've been working with. They're also working with Beacon Development to kind of put the budgets together and get the project going. So they've been funding all of that on their own.
Okay, great. That helps.
So, yeah, the operable dates, it's my understanding for ARPA, committed by the end of December 2024, spent by the end of 2026. So we really are rapidly, I mean, when you start talking about housing projects, you really are rapidly approaching the first aid, because we don't meet, once or twice in December.
It's
So-
at least 6 to 8 months for design and permitting, I would assume. I'm looking at Mr. Buer, or Mr. Gum perhaps.
And
So
so.
they gotta get rolling quickly.
Right, and then you have to know that even if they're hacking away at some of these other things, that they're gonna get this thing out of the ground by the end of 2026.
More than just out of the ground, I think.
Right, unless we're gonna throw our money in, the ARPA money in first, and the county throws the first 4 million or 4.5 million is ARPA, right, to do all the site work and get it out. So, I mean, the dates actually approach more quickly than
Yep.
than people are.
So point well taken. So it
Realize.
sounds like you can help us with the proposed ordinance next week to have some language in there that provides a little conditional timeline as best we can.
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, any other points, Mr. Brandstetter?
Yeah, and while I hear Mr. Boki say that, some of the money that's being committed by us in the county and have some rigid timelines where it has to go, or the money has to be pulled out to the import of scuttling
Right.
the project. I think, I look back at the history on this site, and I go back to the first 15 units in the service center.
Mm-hmm.
What happened there was LASA, without consulting with the city or with Tacoma, went to the State Housing Trust Fund and asked for funding for that project that was not 100%, but was there. And then after the state went in and awarded it, then they came to the Tacoma Housing Authority and the city of Lakewood and said, we need the rest of the money to come from you, or the whole thing falls through. And so we, and that's what led to this language that they have with Tacoma Housing Authority, where Tacoma Housing Authority, in order to come in to do that, but that the truth was neither the Tacoma Housing Authority nor we wanted to be in the position to thinking it costs too much and not wanting to fund it and thus causing it not to happen. And I think that once this project is pretty likely at 75% funded, that same kind of leverage can work with some other potential funders of saying if you don't come through in a timeline that's going to allow the ARPA dollars that have been committed by Pierce County and the city of Lakewood to be used, then this will go away. And that's a good bit of pressure to use to leverage some other potential funders that are there, to include in the next legislative session, getting the state to maybe up the amount of their contribution a little bit and to be able to go and do that. And I think those dynamics will work again in favor of getting the project funded so that contracts can be let and ground can be turned by the timeline that's necessary.
Mr. Lorcella.
Quick question. I'm not as well versed as many of you on this sort of thing, but if there were to be a shortfall going into this, is this something where it could be de-scoped, where they could tackle it at a lower dollar value to build less units?
You could, but it's really hard once you get
Mhm.
down the path of a project and you get to where you're doing construction and now you've got to change it. Actually probably would increase the project cost even if you're doing less. So.
Thank you.
I'm just doing a quick little stubby pencil drill here. So it's about 420 grand per unit, right? At 25 units.
What, repeat that, please?
Huh?
I didn't.
I was just mentally calculating the cost per unit. It's $10.5 million.
Yeah,
It doesn't include any dirt acquisition costs because we've already done that.
Yeah,
So it's about 420 grand per 25 units, right?
it is. Which,
Affordable housing. So.
but
Yeah. Mhm.
something that when you bring that up, I thought that was a good point. So I was looking when we were doing the funding through Pierce County and Tacoma's NOFA, I pulled out all their projects that were new construction that they just got applications for. So I was floored when I saw the per unit costs. So Mercy Housing has a per unit cost for one of their asks of 490,000. And these are the low costs right now.
That probably includes some dirt costs, though, that we're not including here, if you add the dirt costs. in.
Yeah, if you add the dirt costs, you're gonna be
50,
50 something.
Mhm.
But 490 was another project. There was one for 530, a 609, and a $763,000 per unit request now.
That one has granite.
It did not get funded by the funders, but it's interesting seeing kind of the sweet spot is, the sweet spot's about 500 plus a unit now. It's just crazy.
It is, it's just expensive, the cost of construction. It is, it's challenging. On the private side, I don't know, it's all over the board now, but a few years back, I think projects were at the $250 a unit, for private work. Mr. Anderson has his hand up.
At some point, as stewards of the public trust, we have to seriously consider whether projects, no matter how well intentioned, are actually worth it. There's so much ARPA money, housing money floating around, most of which, unlike this project, perhaps are dedicated to housing first, which has been an utter failure in every major metropolitan area where it's been imposed over the last 10 years. there's better ways to help people. You can pay their rent, you can provide services as a condition of accepting that rental payment. And it's a lot cheaper than spending the $500,000 plus a unit and then having the forever costs of the dependency that's created by permanent housing. Sometimes you have to consider being essentially the parent and saying, no, we're going to help you, we're going to support you, but you don't get this, it's not worth it.
It's a challenging conundrum, affordable housing, because you have to meet the AMI standards and there are few units available to do it and larger need than units. It's tough, but point well taken. Yep, Mr. Boki has another point.
As we embark on this, and this is ahead or behind the curve, the mayor especially, but the council as a whole expressed some concerns and when the new executive director was here. I guess this is mainly for the council as a whole, have those concerns about safety been addressed? Background checks specifically, and how they deal with their situations, because that was it was a horrible situation. It could have been incredibly tragic. And clearly we have the expectation that this won't, I mean, they can't guarantee us that it won't happen, but that they'll take steps to make sure that it doesn't happen. Are we okay with that, I guess, with their efforts and his answers when he was here?
Yeah, Mr. Gunn will know better than I, but it seems to me, I recall that they used a third-party property management company to vet the tenants and do the tenant screening, and they were relying on that. Maybe as part of the 117 grand in admin costs, there might be some oversight to make sure that there is exactly that, some third-party tenant screening and review.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's important to them. I mean, at least that's what I got when I met with the executive director and talked to him. I mean, their current project is a little more difficult because THA is involved and they are the housing owner. So I mean, there's
For a period of time till the loan's paid off and then it rolls
then it
into
reverts
loss
back, or
Yeah.
unless they can negotiate something in the interim to return it to LASA from
Mhm.
THA. So, but on the new project, they are the landlord. So
Right.
they determine their criteria, they do their background checks, and it's all on them to do
Mhm.
that. And I think the last incident and council's concern kind of drove that point home with them.
Good.
That's extremely important.
Very good. Well, good discussion all around. Any other comments for the good of the order on that? Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll let you drive home to Kitsap County now. Okay, next we have our long range and strategic planning manager, Ms. Tiffany Spear, to lead us through the 2024 comprehensive plan periodic review update.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one moment, please.
Sure. I think he lives,
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, Tiffany Spear. I'm going to stay back here just in case we continue to have issues with our remote to be able to move through the slides.
Sure.
So as you're aware, there's been a number of times where I've been in front of you this year to talk about certain pieces of the 2024 comprehensive plan periodic review process, rather than the usual annual process by which the city opens up for about a month an application for members of the public to request a particular application. And then there's maybe something that the city proposes as well. A docket is set and that is all that's considered. This is a 10-year process where everything front to back of the entire comprehensive plan and then the associated development regulations are reviewed. So this is a different order of magnitude, if you will, in terms of review that's happening right now through the end of 2024. Tonight, we're going to be talking about land use in particular. And yes, that does include housing, which has been before you a number of times already this year, but it includes more than that. So we'll be talking about multiple topics. Maybe. There we go. Okay. So there are two websites now where people can go to get information up to date. One is on the city's website at just 24 periodic review. The other is called lakewoodwaspeaks.org. And that is a place actually where people can not only sign up for information about the progress as we go forward, but they can also submit comments about their thoughts regarding any of the issues under review. The other thing that's happened is on those two sites, you can access all of the sessions that have been held both at the Planning Commission and the City Council levels to date. You can see the meetings. You can also see all of the meeting materials. And what you see on the bottom is the beginning of our updates that we're providing out to people who have subscribed, talking about more details about this process, asking for participation in events and open houses, as well as steering committee. And then also, again, inviting them to provide comment over this next year over topics of interest. One thing that we did do also in just this last week was start to reach out to our partners. So the tribes, utilities, special districts, education partners, agencies, and other government partners have all been invited. And we had quite a few of those in our first meeting this last week. And what we are intending to do now that we've had that kind of convening process, we're now going to be reaching out individually to the various organizations and agencies to say, these are our specific requests of you per state law and what we need to do to update the city's comprehensive plan. Oh, no. I lost it. Thank you. So one of the things that's now changed is in the land use element, there are not only things that Lakewood has had for a number of years, a number of cycles of this 10-year review, but some new things required by state law. And you'll see those particularly down on the bottom of this list, promoting physical activity that's even above and beyond the longstanding encouragement for parks and open space, but also reducing wildfire risks and also reducing vehicle miles traveled. So those are items that will be part of our review as we move forward before this comes to the Planning Commission and then Council next spring. In addition to that, looking at items again that have been in the comprehensive plan for already and development regs already, but we need to just verify that they are up to date with state law and regional policy, including identification of all of the different land uses. So utility corridors, transportation, landfills, sewage, stormwater, recreation, schools, and other public uses. And then also updating our critical areas ordinance, incorporating the best available science that is available out since the 2016-2017 review of the plan. There are three levels of either review or challenge that go along with this process. So first of all, the Department of Commerce asks that we provide them with drafts of the policies and plans that will be attached as appendices to the comprehensive plan. And they review it just to see if it's consistent with the GMA before final action is taken. If they feel it is not, they would provide us with communication explaining where they see potential issues of concern. Puget Sound Regional Council does an actual certification, as many of you are aware, and it is related specifically to transportation. PSRC has a funnel of federal dollars that go through its agency's analysis for transportation projects. And if the PSRC finds that for whatever reason, the transportation planning by Lakewood is not consistent with the GMA and also with the Vision 2050's county-wide planning policies, which apply to Pierce, Kitsap, King, and Snohomish counties, as well as the regional transportation plan, then they can say you are either partially certified or not. If you're not certified, then the jurisdiction would not be eligible for those transportation funds. Third piece is if anyone were wishing to actually challenge the outcome once the city council were to take action, the challenge would start at the Growth Management Hearings Board. And then if there was a challenge beyond that decision, it would then move into Superior Court. So back to 2017, the last time this process happened, the top here of the slide shows that PSRC found everything was up to snuff regarding transportation, environment, housing, economic development, and public services. However, all of those areas will be touched on in the review that we're conducting right now because of the number of changes that have happened with state bills since then, particularly in the last 2 sessions, as well as Vision 2050, that should be Vision 2050, sorry, and also the 2020 census results. So we will be going back and looking at those, but it's not because there was an error or anything found by the PSRC last time around. There were 2 areas that PSRC mentioned as areas for further work. One was to make sure that the employment growth target was accurate within the comprehensive plan. And then what you see at the bottom there in that table is the most recent growth target for jobs in Lakewood. This is through 2044. The total there is 9,863 new jobs by that date. And then the following 2 columns are showing you what is currently planned for within the 2 big sub areas. So first in downtown and then in Station District, 75% of new jobs were planned for in the downtown sub area plan in 2018, another 13% within the Station District, and then the remainder would go somewhere else in the city. So whether during this process, when the sub areas are reviewed, that share of jobs remains the same, we're not sure yet, but between the Lakewood Station and the downtown number, we're already at 88% of that total growth target if the things were to happen in the sub areas. The other area that was for further work per 2017 by PSRC was the idea of annexation. And the map that you see on this slide shows you in red up next to Stillicum, there's that area called Arrowhead Partridge Glen. That is a joint annexation area, meaning either Stillicum or Lakewood could annex some or all of that area. And then the green hatch marks is either the Joint Base Lewis McChord urban areas, the cantonment area, or that smaller red circle surrounds Camp Murray. The discussion has been had numerous times with the public as well as at the city level about annexation. For Arrowhead Partridge Glen, there's been 3 votes in the past, all 3 failed. And the discussion with Joint Base Lewis McChord at that time, it would have been Fort Lewis and McChord Air Force Base. There was no support from the Department of Defense for annexation of the cantonment area. There is also at this point no interest by the Washington Military Department, which runs Camp Murray, for annexation. However, as you know, also there is a Camp Murray master plan that's now getting done in partnership with the military department regarding, in particular, the American Lake boat launch, but it's also just continuing that open dialogue between Washington Military Department and the city of Lakewood. Just a quick note there, that darker purple to the south of Lakewood, that is the urban area that would be potentially annexed should that ever be supported by the Department of Defense. But again, at this point, that's not the case. So jumping forward to now, the 2024 review, they will be looking at those 2 items that they identified in 2017 just to see the status of them. And then there's some new things that they will also be looking for. No surprises, consistency with Vision 2050 policies and the GMA, but also an emphasis now on greenhouse gas emission reduction, looking at transit-oriented development and working with transit agencies, housing supply near transit and job centers, and then also looking at consistency again with the regional transportation plan, looking at the regional growth assumptions that were made and then translated down into the 2044 growth targets. The other thing that has happened in the city of Lakewood over time is that a regional urban growth center was identified by Puget Sound Regional Council. And so this happens to be in Lakewood exactly the same boundaries as our downtown sub area. Prior to the adoption of the sub area, it actually had different boundaries. But this is one that is recognized at the regional level where growth is supposed to happen in order for, again, Lakewood to be qualifying for a certain amount of transportation funds. As it stands now, our sub-area plan is functioning as the center's plan that's required. And in 2025, Puget Sound Regional Council is going to be reviewing that. So we're going to get through the 24 comp plan process, and then they're going to be looking at the center plan in particular. As a result, we're making sure when we go through this 2024 process that we are paying attention to what they will require the following year to make sure that everything is going to be handled at the same time. This is the future land use map as it stands effective last week. This reflects the 2023 amendments that the council adopted in July. So again, you'll see by color, different colors equal different types of zones and land uses. The red is the downtown sub-area, for instance, and then just to the southeast of that, that black hatch mark with a lot of pink underneath it is the station district. You'll see to the west a lot of yellow. Those are residential areas. Everywhere from right next to downtown all the way over to the boundary of the city by Steilacoom. Not going to go through this in great detail here, but this is breaking down by zone, the amount of acres are in that zone, and it also shows you the number of units per acre. This is the beginning of our analysis of the consistency with House Bill 1110, which is multiple units per lot, and then also 1337, which is you have to require so many accessory dwelling units on lots. But that also is dependent on the amount of units per acre already allowed. So for instance, the mixed residential zoning uses, which are at least 8.7 units per acre, and then multifamily is higher than that. Those will not have to comply with those two bills because they're already above what densities would be called for in Bill 1110 or 1337. The other thing to note on the right-hand side, those bottom three bullets, about a quarter of all of the housing capacity identified in the city is currently in the residential 3 zone. So that is about 23% of the acreage, but it holds, it's less than that in terms of acreage, but it holds a quarter of the entire city's housing capacity. Most of the housing capacity is in multifamily. And then the other key point to remember here is that for the city of Lakewood, our buildable lands analysis, which is, okay, you guys have adopted policies, you've adopted regulations, you're encouraging things with incentive programs, all on paper, all well and good. But if you start to look at actual permit activity, is it actually happening as planned? And if so, where? And then assuming that the answer is all positive there, do you have enough capacity going into the future to keep it as a positive analysis? What you have in Lakewood is 78% of capacity for future development on underutilized parcels, meaning it's not virgin land, it's not green fields, it's not even empty brown fields. It is on parcels that already have something on the parcel, but maybe it's a lower density than the max in a particular zone, or maybe the value of the building or use is not the highest and best use. So for instance, a house in the middle of a commercial district. So all of that to say, when the growth happens over the next 20 years, and I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, but it's going to be redevelopment, it's going to be infill where things already are on a particular parcel. So here, looking at that in a different way, in a graphic way, that teal color that's circled on the right-hand side in the legend, that is underutilized. And so you can see it's pretty well spread throughout the city's area. Everywhere from the very northern tip down into Steilacoom and Woodbrook, and it's across commercial properties and also residential properties. So again, looking at analysis moving forward into this next year to bring you a package, there's going to be a conversation about how much potential is there actually on these underutilized parcels, be they residential or commercial or even industrial. Coming back to the 2044 growth targets, Councilmember Branstetter mentioned this a little bit ago. The top lighter orange table shows you in red on the second row that the total number of units that the city has been assigned is 9,378 new units. A unit doesn't equal a single family house. A unit could be anything from a house to an apartment unit, for instance. And then across the columns of that table, you'll see how things are broken up by income band. So permanent supportive housing or non-permanent supportive housing, meaning not having social services attached to the units at 0 to 30% of income. And then there's different bars, 30 to 50, 50 to 80 and on up. The other item that is of, yes.
Do the ADUs count as a unit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The other item in that table that's in red is the number of emergency housing units that the city needs to be prepared for. Right now, there's 8 and it needs to be 574 per this ordinance in 2044. So the 25 units, for instance, that LASA was just the subject of your conversation. Obviously, that's not going to get you to 574, but in 20 years at that pace. But that's the type of project that the hopefully additional supportive housing providers would be bringing to the city.
Mayor. Sure, but where does the Lehigh purchase, where does that fit in on the scale here?
Unfortunately, I don't know that it does at all because that is Candlewood Suites is 85 units that they are planning to open as state right-of-way funded project, meaning they are not open to anybody getting referred there. They are only for individuals picked up along the state right-of-way corridor. And that does not necessarily equate to Lakewood units. So we've talked about Candlewood a number of times here. You can say that it's coming, it's here, the permitting has started, but whether it goes toward the 574 units, I'm going to have to verify. Sorry. Yeah. The bottom table breaks this down specifically to the 2 big sub areas. So out of the 9,378 units total, about a quarter are at this point planned to go into the downtown, about 18% into the Station District, and then 58% elsewhere in the city, across the city. The jobs, again, we just talked about this, but in downtown, about 75% was originally the plan, 13% in the Station District, and 12% elsewhere in the city. All of this analysis that was done for both downtown and Station District housing and jobs predates the conversation that's happened now with you have to plan for so many units by income band. So when we're doing our review of the 2 sub areas, we will be taking that into account to figure out how they may need to be amended in order to take that new requirement from state law into their numbers as well. There are actually 3 sub areas. So downtown and Station District I've talked about, but the one that's in lighter purple on the bottom of the city is the Tillicum neighborhood plan. That one we are kicking off right now, the public outreach and forming of the Tillicum steering committee to really update substantially the 2011 neighborhood plan. So it's going to not only take into account everything that's happened to implement the last version, but also bring it up to date with the new, for instance, I-5 interchanges, some of the other new housing that's come in through Habitat for Humanity, and some of the other rezones that have happened in recent years. There's a lot on this slide. It's 9 o'clock. I will try to walk through this intelligibly, but somewhat efficiently. Let's put it that way. So this is a map that shows in yellow, again, those residential areas, the single family residential zones, R1, 2, 3, and 4. And they are primarily on the west side of the city. Under state law, under 1110, those are the areas where the city would be required to say at least 2 dwelling units in it. Sorry, yes, at least 2 dwelling units, and then additionally, maybe another ADU under House Bill 1337. It's very complicated as to how those 2 bills interact with each other. The east side of the city that has more white, those orange areas are also residential areas. And because they are closer to transit, they actually need 4 units per lot versus 2. So the big pink blobs and the blue hatch marks now, though, are starting to take some of that impact of those bills away, because those are your critical areas. And the bill excuses out those lots that are affected by critical areas and buffers. So we are in the early stages of figuring out really how much impact 1110 and 1337 are going to have and where it will be in the city. It's not a simple analysis, which is why I wasn't able to bring you more than this kind of detail right now tonight, but we are working on it. One thing, though, that last slide didn't take into account is the presence of Gary Oaks, the city's tree code, and the city's 2050 urban tree canopy goal. So what you see here in lighter and darker green, and then also the orange outlines, are where Gary Oak stands or individual trees have been identified in the city. And if you'll recall, if you have two or more, they are considered a habitat area, a critical area. So they would also be protected and exempted out of the two higher density bills. So again, we're starting this math, we're starting this analysis, and hope to be able to bring you much clearer and simplified data once we get that analysis done.
It's quite the series of Venn diagrams.
Yes. The other point I would make regarding trees, this goes back to the tree code analysis that was done. On the top left, where you see the lighter green and then even almost a white, that is where there is the least amount of tree cover right now. Just below that in red, you see where the highest temperatures are in the city, and it's pretty much the same parts of the city where there's less trees. No surprise. And then on the bottom right, you'll see areas where, per the tree code that was adopted and the idea of establishing an urban forestry program, those were the areas initially identified as high priority for tree planting. So this is an example of where we're going to have to try to weigh multiple, not necessarily conflicting, but not fully coordinated policies. Do you let trees trump density, or is density going to trump trees? Or how do we try to make all of this dovetail together? So those will be questions coming before the commission and then to you next spring. One more piece is also that wildfire protection, or reducing wildfire risk. And if you look at, again, this isn't city boundaries shown, I apologize, but the red in the left is basically just below, just south of Fort Steilacoom Park, down into the southwestern side of the city. And then also in some of Steilacoom and down into Woodbrook, you have wildfire risk. So again, are we looking at public safety and wildfire risk prevention? Are we looking at tree retention? Are we looking at climate change and greenhouse gas reductions? Are we looking at housing densification? A lot of competing policies, which under the GMA are all supposed to be weighed equally. So these are things that we will be trying to provide you with well-documented and explained options for you to consider come next spring. So just to finish up tonight, what you see here on the left-hand side are the various chapters that we anticipate bringing to you for the new version of the comprehensive plan. And land use will have its own chapter along with all of those others that you see there. The list on the right are all of the other plans that we are incorporating per that requirement that I showed you at the very start of interacting with utilities and service agencies that are partners to the city. So the city's own transportation and parks improvement programs, the outside utilities that are providing services within the city, working with both Pierce and Sound Transit and their plans, the school district, and then also taking a look at non-motorized improvements, the ADA transition plan, the Clover Creek flood study that was presented earlier this year, the Parks Legacy Plan, and then again, looking at some of those other partner plans that we have with external agencies. Last thing on the bottom there, I know the council just very recently adopted an update to its strategic plan that will also help inform the way the comprehensive plan is updated in this process. Timing, this is aggressive, I will grant you, but we're trying to get here. May 1st, it's going to start at the Planning Commission, and there will be a number of there's continuing to be study sessions between now and then, but there will be a number of opportunities for public hearing and comment beginning May 1st at the commission. They are scheduled as of now to be complete with their process and recommendation to you at the end of June. And then starting in July, the hearings for this whole package, everything will be in front of you starting in July. The deadline is December 31st to get this completely done, but the hope is that given the amount of effort that will have happened at the Planning Commission, the council will be able to hold 1 or 2 public hearings and be complete by end of July or maybe early August, and then you can move on to other issues that you'll be dealing with next year. So one more time, there's the 2 websites to go to, and then my information was also provided in this evening's packet. But other than that, happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you. Great overview of the process. It's frankly kind of fascinating. Yeah, really interesting. The conundrum of policy issues. Any questions of Ms. Spear at this point? Again, it's an overview. We'll have plenty of time dig into this over the next 18 months. Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, thank you for the overview, and I look forward to perhaps getting some more periodically as this moves through, and that'll help us when we get to July of next year. I think that maybe the concept that the council will solely be able to take action based on having 2 meetings in July and being able to act, maybe a bit optimistic, depending upon how complicated all these changes are. I had 2 questions about analysis and what we're thinking, and it somewhat comes from the fact of my spending 20 years in the community and technical college system, and I've been dealing with how do we help the community in our discussions as a council about, one of the real focuses is that we have this non-bell curve distribution of the economic well-being of people. In other words, we got a lot of poor people, not a lot of middle people, and then we got people who are in that 120% of AMI. And we've always talked about, and we've dealt with approving some strategies about we're trying to move people from the low income to get them to where they're like at that 100% of AMI, but they stay in the city, being able to go and do that. And that seems kind of contrary to increase the amount of housing for people. It's like what they're asking us to do is exaggerate the problem we already have by adding housing for more people at the very low end, as opposed to being able to take the people we have now who are our current citizens and help them make their lives better so that they move up that. And yet what we want to do is we don't want to create housing for them to move to be able to go and do that. And somehow of course, between now and 2044, the AMI numbers will move around in being able to go and do that. And as we grow 10,000 jobs, hopefully we grow them with the impact that we grow a greater percentage of our people are in those, not in that 0 to 30%, but are in the 80 to 120 range of where we want to go. And it seems like they're asking us to work against ourselves. And I don't know how to address that in our planning, but I don't think we kind of want to get away to, at least in the wording, in the text of how we're talking about how the comprehensive plan is going to work for 20 years, that we do expect, and that we've got some policies, not just to have density, but also to not have more people in 0 to 30%, but to move people through those ranges to be able to go and do that. And while that doesn't seem like a land use issue, it's that if you're going to move people through, you've got to make places for them. Because one of our situations in the Clover Park School District is that relates to their great turnover in students, that they don't have students that stay for 12 years or 8 years or even all 5 years in an elementary school, is that because we have a great deal of housing for those low income bands, and we do compared to other communities, if you just look at today, we're providing more of them. but that as we help people get ahead, the place that they need to move to when they get ahead is out of the city. And they're asking us to perpetuate that problem by the distribution of new housing that they want us to have. And we've sort of lost that battle with the Pierce County Commission to do that. They've essentially created Lakewood as one of their designated dumping grounds for low income people. I'm not sure how far we really want to go to following the exact letter of that, or even how you designate that this parcel is going to be for 0 to 30, and we're not going to be able to go and do that, but we're going to have to still put a plan on paper, but work contrary to it to help people. What goes on to do that. So I guess sort of like to see some analysis or something in our final product that indicates we also have that other goal about helping people move from left to right on that chart and not be displaced out of the city, to be able to go and do that. I had one other thing that was struck me as odd on one of your charts, and it's just because of my background, that we had the Bates Technical College master plan as one of the plans we were looking at, but we don't have the Clover Park Technical College master plan.
It might not have shown because the slide wasn't fully displaying. I apologize if it wasn't there.
So is it really the Clover Park master plan, or are we? Anyway, if you just look at the slides, or if you show it to
Certainly.
somebody else, they'll
Sure.
also be puzzled. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Well, very good. Well, thank you for the update.
Thank you.
As indicated on your agenda, items scheduled for the August 21 regular city council meeting are as indicated, including the topics we discussed tonight. And we'll also have a review of the city hall redesign study by the city manager next week. So at present, Mr. Caulfield, you're up. Reports by the city manager.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members. Few updates. Wanted to give you an update on the status of what's going on with the city and others helping out those who were displaced by the fire down at Jamestown Estates a week ago Friday. So the investigation of the fire actually continues. However, West Pierce Fire and Rescue has authorized the cleaning up of the debris and the like to move forward. So the city is working with Rock USA, who's the underlying landowner and landlord, if you will, of that property to undertake that. Also want to recognize LASA, who has agreed to serve as the housing navigator to help those individuals, those families who have been displaced to find new housing. So since last week, they have been meeting with them. Likewise, one of our staff, our housing program coordinator, Martha Larkin, has been meeting with them pretty much on a daily basis, including today, and that will continue for the rest of this week, or rather until they actually find new housing. We are standing by with the relocation costs to be able to be paid to those new housing providers wherever they go. We had some challenges with several of the families with relocation costs since they fell outside the low and or moderate income levels. However, we reached out to HUD in downtown Seattle, and we were able to work with them so that they could be taken care of with the financial resources that we receive. So that is moving forward. In addition, we did find a way to help the person who had a portion of his mobile home, the whole side of the wall was melted off. It is a difficult situation. He does have some challenges. He's not employed. And he's past due on his rent with Rock USA. So we're working with Rock USA to try and resolve that issue to get him the assistance that he needs so that his mobile home can be either repaired or done something so that it's in a livable state. So also Rock USA, we're still waiting to hear back from them regarding the insurance. Again, they are the landowner that is financed with funding from Washington State Housing Finance Commission. And then they in turn have a local group of residents at Jamestown Estates who then kind of serves as the owner's rep, and they're the ones who collect, the rent, if you will, from each of the housing units that then is used to pay, to pay off the loan, but also to help maintain the facility as well.
I thought they were owned kind of as a
they are, but
cooperative.
but Rock USA is the underlying owner and the financier is the state. So they have control over the property, so they don't have to worry about who their landlord is. So but they're not the true owners of the property. Rock USA is.
One would think that Rock USA then would have had adequate insurance coverage in place.
We are still waiting back. Matter of fact, their response is they are working with their insurance company to try and sort it out. So that's what we're waiting for. So, but and again, I want to recognize among, a number of staff who've been helping out here, but particularly our housing coordinator, Martha Larkin, who has been working with these families. And over the years, she actually has relationships with most, if not all of them as well. So she is considered to be a friendly face to them. Wanted to let you know, we're looking to bring back our volunteer recognition event. Our city clerk is working on that. And so we're looking at doing it on Wednesday, September 27th, beginning in the, about 5 o'clock or so. And actually a correction, we're looking at doing it over at the Clover Park Rotunda, since actually the Fort Steilacoom Pavilion is not available because there's other activities going on down there.
The 27th.
Oh, did you get the invite? Okay, perfect.
27th
September 27th.
in the afternoon, huh? 5 o'clock.
Yes, yeah, between 5 and 7, 5 and 6:30. And yes, Mayor, there'll be some
Cookies. Yeah, great.
snacks. That is correct. So, but this is something we want to bring back. We haven't done it since 2019, and this was something on an annual basis that we had kicked off, a handful of years ago. Wanted to just let you know that our municipal court department under the leadership of Judge Mansfield was able to secure a $187,000 grant to establish a therapeutic court that would serve Lakewood, DuPont, and Steilacoom, very similar to our Veterans Treatment Court. The grant is only for 1 year, however, so it actually goes into effect July 1st. But really it goes into effect once we get up and running. And the monies can be used through June 30th of 2024. So really we're looking at it as one-time monies to be able to reimburse our court for whatever resources they allocate to establish for this. And then hopefully they'll be able to go back and apply on an annual basis for this grant to continue the therapeutic court moving forward from there. Just wanted to let you know that Sound Transit is looking at making updates to their strategic plan. The punchline is this, that they're looking at reducing services as it comes south, and that is based on, it's a combination of reducing services and changing services, and that's simply based on the world as it is today since the pandemic. And I know, Mayor, you have been invited to a meeting or an event sometime in September where more information will be provided on that. There was actually a meeting earlier this afternoon that our staff attended, and I'll send you the results of that so you can see what they're proposing. So I guess the punchline is that Lakewood residents and businesses will continue to pay a lot of money to Sound Transit. However, now the services that they're providing will actually be further reduced. I'm not trying to be antagonistic here or anything. I'm just stating the facts. And then likewise, it looks like the extension of the sounder down to DuPont, which was supposed to be up and running about 2030, 2035, is being pushed out to 2045. So service, just regular service. No, on the Sounder.
Yeah,
train.
I'm just waiting to see if it comes to downtown Tacoma.
So our suggestion, no, that's the light rail. That's light rail, talking Sounder,
That's right, okay.
So-
Yep.
2045. That's
Wow.
correct.
Hmm.
So one of the things that we have suggested, and I know I anticipate to be part of some discussions here is, I think, Sound Transit, they have this infrastructure in place. They have all of these trains and such. It was built for commuters, but trains can be used for other purposes. Trains can be used if there's not commuters available Monday through Friday. Guess what? There's a number of people that would like to get on a train and go elsewhere or come here. And let's use it more for, I want to say, tourism or just getting out and about and keeping vehicles off of I-5 and things along those lines. But that is nowhere in their initial.
At the very minimum, they should enhance weekend service. So
That's
people can do exactly that.
Along those lines, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly. And right now, their weekend enhancements are really only for, special events, football
Games,
games, basically,
yeah.
which
Yeah.
there's more going on than just that.
Yep.
So just wanted to give you a warning order on that. We did get possession of use of that one property on Hipkins so that we can move forward with the Hipkins Road project between 104th and Steilacoom. So that'll go out to bid here in the near future with council consideration of a contract latter part of October, November. And then the contractor, whomever that is, would probably begin building in the early part of, probably January or so.
Sounds a little piece for the roundabout.
So that's correct. That is correct, Mayor. And actually that project also includes a significant upgrade to the water main. So that would actually occur first, similar to what we're seeing along Washington Boulevard. So this will be a drawn out project. As you know, the LTAC applications for 2024 grant awards are open. The deadline is later this month. So the city is looking to submit for programs that we support. For example, Summerfest, Farmers Market, street festivals. We've spun off the Fiesta de la Familia as a separate item because it's being moved to Fort Steilacoom Park and summer concerts as well as communications. I want to be upfront on something. Our request for funding has increased, and the reason it has increased is because our programs have been so successful that the need to continue these programs at the level that the community has come to expect is at that level. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. So when you see those applications, when they come to you in November, compared to previous years, that's what's driving that.
Expensive.
And actually, that's a good thing because again, the programs are so successful that in the events that we're putting on. As it relates to upcoming events, again, Farmers Market continues this Thursday. It's a dance band, a little funk and some R&B out at the pavilion. Also, next Saturday on the 19th is the end of summer celebration event hosted by Springbrook Connections in Lakewood's Choice at Springbrook Park. And that's from noon to 5. And then the following Saturday, the last Saturday in August, there's a wall raising for Dr. Claudia Thomas's home with Habitat for Humanity. It's on Portland Avenue. And if you have an interest in participating in that or family members, you do need to register and sign up because there is a waiver that everybody needs to sign if you wish to get hands-on and doing that. And then lastly, the city clerk sent out another doodle poll, an updated doodle poll regarding a legislative retreat. Saturdays didn't seem to be working. So we provided a couple of Thursdays, if that would work for you.
In the evening.
If not, I might have to work with you to clear a study session. Maybe that first study session on Monday, I think it's October 11th.
We have
So-
a fifth Monday.
We don't, this needs to be done. You need to do this work in the early part of October so that we have it done by latter October,
Got it.
early November at the latest.
Yep.
So then we can set meetings with our legislators in early to mid-November.
Okay.
So that's kind of the backward planning part.
Will we have some of the feedback from our efforts with the mayors in the South Side by then?
Perhaps to be determined, Mayor, but
Okay.
that's not to say that this body can't move forward with what you would like to see from a public safety
Got it.
initiative.
Source out.
Then, Mayor, I will let you cover the outcome of that
Sure.
meeting, but I do want to say I thought the mayor did an outstanding job in facilitating that discussion. And as a part of that, actually drawing out further the participants of really what their issues, concerns, and what they wanted to see happen. And overwhelmingly, cities, mayors, and others are very supportive of some much needed changes to address public safety concerns that we are seeing and that our residents and businesses are feeling up front. So with that, that's my report.
Quick questions.
Question real quick. Thank you, John. If we can't have our retreat at the end of the month in the 5th week, why don't we bump one of our study sessions to that 5th week and put it into one of the study sessions instead?
Yeah, we could look at that.
That way
Councilman.
we don't lose a session, but we still are able to accomplish it.
And the good news is the agenda around that period of time, there's some flexibility in moving some things around as well.
Any other questions, Mr. Caulfield? Mr. Branstetter?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Caulfield, we have on the agenda next week, the allocating some money to the Metropolitan Development Council or whatever they're called now, MDC, based on they're having some internal issues that resulted in them not getting the funding to be able to continue to support a number of Lakewood residents. I guess I have some concerns about providing the money directly to MDC. And I would like to be able to at least have somebody from MDC be present in case we wanted to ask some questions about how that goes. And would like for them to sort of provide a budget as to how that amount of money would be used. And I'm concerned that it not be used to where there is a percentage that is being siphoned off for their administrative purposes. And a little bit of clarification of one of the elements in one of your previous emails that said, first it said that MDC figured they'd be able to go back to fully supporting these residents at the end of the year when they reapply for the funding that has as its source somewhere within the Pierce County funding allocation. But that there was also something that Pierce County was looking at no longer funding MDC, but having that the funding that program goes to another organization that was mentioned. And if MDC is not going to end up being the long-term funder after the end of this year, I don't know whether there's whether that remains the best way to channel assistance to these homeowners. And I was also curious as to whether these rental properties were enrolled in the rental housing safety program. Because we wrote some exceptions in the rental housing safety program for some rental units that were parts of rental assistance programs, such as units that were being paid for primarily with vouchers. And I really don't know what these units really are. So I want to help the people, but I don't necessarily want to just do it to provide some temporary help to an agency that is perhaps inept.
So Councilmember, there's quite a bit there, so I'll try and get to all of it. So representative from MDC is going to be here. It's my understanding the CEO of MDC will be here, so you can have Adam or her. I don't know who it is. Secondly, I'll just try and go off. MDC, the money is passed through to MDC and it's going directly to the 6 clients' landlords to pay for their rent and for their utilities. And so there is no allocation for administrative overhead in any shape, form, or manner going to MDC. We will also have the specific funding of who goes to what that will be included in your packet so that you'll be able to see that. It's our understanding that it's a very fluid situation in terms of MDC in the county and looking at different options and where some of these clients may move in the near future or far future. But that, quite frankly, that's at a pay grade above me. I'm just sharing that with you. But again, our recommendation is for the city council to provide these funding to help these six Lakewood residents. And again, MDC is simply the pass through, and it's going to go directly to the landlords on behalf of the six tenants. I don't know if I got them all. Did I get it all, Councilor?
Good summary.
I don't have an answer for you on that. That's a, I would presume that if they're living in those units, and we'll provide you the
They're on the
addresses,
list.
that they are in compliance.
Mhm. Or at least they're on the list for inspection.
That's
like
correct.
everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're all privately owned. So, and they're units. So some of the units are in smaller apartment complexes. There's a couple that are in very large apartment complexes. Like one, for example, is in the Morning Tree apartment
We
complex.
could probably get some information from
Yeah.
Mr. Gum.
But there's
Yeah.
six of them. There's six. That's correct. They go with the people.
Right.
That is correct.
The landlords of the people.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Any other questions, Mr. Caulfield, on that? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, let's turn to council comments. Let's start with Councilmember Bell tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. I just thought that they were really great presentations tonight, so I appreciate that information and I look forward to hearing more about the comp plan in the future. And that's all I have.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Lauricella.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have some questions that I'll ask next time we review the comp plan, but I did note that it stated that we had 8 emergency units in the city, and last I heard we had 0, so I'm not sure where those 8 are. So that might be worth reviewing. And then there was reference to LASA providing emergency units, and I don't think that's in the plan either, so some clarification on that would be useful.
Very good. I know that the emergency units were likely designated at the unit down on Hosmer for Lakewood, but that
Right,
will no
they're not
longer be the
within-
case. in
yeah.
Lakewood, yeah.
And I also wanted to thank what this Councilmember Branstetter mentioned earlier about understanding that if we are funding additional low income housing, that shifts the scale to the lower end. And as people move out of that, sometimes they move out of the city, and that impacts the metrics. We have to make sure we know what we want to do to benefit the residents as best we can. So being aware of that is a new perspective that I hadn't considered. So thank you. And that's it.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Branstetter.
Well, thanks, Mayor. I did attend AWC's budget workshop this past week. It was something that I had done 6 years ago, and I was just trying to refresh myself and see what they had in terms of other new legislation that goes on. I think the two takeaways that I got from the multiple sessions that they had is at numerous times the importance of written financial policy and following your written financial policy was emphasized, and I was very surprised that out of the 90 cities that were represented there were a significant number that indicated they really didn't have detailed written financial policies. And again, they tended to be smaller cities that were doing that, but that and the folks who were presenters and the folks from the state auditor's office just said, that's just a way to get yourself in trouble and to and to have a lack of consistency with in your financial planning and budgeting, being able to go and do that. So it made me feel good to think that we were on the other end of that spectrum. That our financial policies serve us well, and our staff that adhere to them diligently and ensure that we do as well, to go on. I also attended the workshop and it's the final preliminary budget workshop for the South Sound 911 board. And that there were really two highlights in their proposed budget that I would just want to inform the rest of the council about. One is beginning this year, there is a portion of their budget that comes from an assessment to law enforcement agencies that is for records keeping. And the records keeping software that has been used for since the inception of South Sound 911 is become obsolete, okay, is no longer going to be there, that they're starting on a 2-year program to find a vendor and to upgrade that. And it's expected to cost somewhere in the $3 million neighborhood to do that. And the records functions of South Sound 911 are funded by allocations to all of the police agencies in the county. And so the decision was made to, in addition to the allocation funding 2024 operational costs for record keeping, that they're adding a 1.5 million surcharge that will be spread around across all the law enforcement agencies, proportionate to the formula that is used for doing that, to be able to get the 1.5 million and get started to that, so that they don't have to do it with a 3+ million in 2025 or 2026 when they finally have to put this all together. But that'll show in our budget an increase in our costs of our police department for that. Again, it's that 1.5 million being spread across all of the police agencies in the county, primarily on a basis that is based on the number of commissioned officers that you have. So, and we're the third largest department in that regard, after the sheriff and Tacoma. And then the second thing is that a priority that has the South Sound 911 board and the police and fire chiefs have coalesced around is moving from the 3 joined but not working exceptionally well together radio networks that are used across the county for first responders, to moving to a single system. Been studying that and working with that as to what that will take, in particularly in terms of capital investment to do. It's envisioned that it may be something in the range of $9 to $11 million once a final plan is put together and vetted to make sure it's what we want to do. So out of in the South Sound 911 budget, using some money that comes from the 1% sales tax that helps fund South Sound 911, that we've been for a couple of years and will continue to put some money aside into a reserve fund for that project, because the way that we've funded the big projects before, like building the center or buying everybody radios or doing something, is that they've bonded them. But the 1% sales tax does have, the 1/10 of 1% sales tax does have a sunset on it. And so bonding may not be an ideal issue, but it's a priority need. And while hopefully the voters will extend the sunset at some point in time, we're not at the point of asking them yet. And so there's a little bit of, there's, you know, 7 figures being set aside out of the budget to go into that reserve fund. And we have done that last year as well. And so it will, and that has an impact on some other things. But on the plus side, the Southside 911 is now getting a greater percentage of the E911 excise tax that's on phone bills. And so that has provided some money that is essentially the communications allocations, what is distributed to police and fire departments, are actually the total allocation needed for next year is slightly less than what it was, despite the fact that the costs have gone up and being able to go and do that. But there are some things to do that. So, it's sort of a mixed impact on the city, but, trying to with a view towards improving things in the future as well.
Mr. Anderson, gonna keep you awake over there. How about you? Welcome.
Greetings from Denver. The question of ownership with respect to AOC and the mobile home park came up. They use a model out of New Hampshire. It's my understanding it's called a limited equity model, which lowers the cost to the residents, and it's a co-op. So unlike a overly simplified, unlike a condominium, which we're accustomed to in Washington, where everybody owns a little chunk of the space in a common unit, the unit is owned as a whole and people have a right to use it. It has some aspects like a land trust, so it can't be converted to something else and people can't unreasonably profit on it by turning it into an industrial complex. So it is, the owners have an equity, the individual owners of units have an equity interest, but it's controlled through a co-op. So that's kind of have a nuance that's strange to Washington. Earlier, Mr. Branstetter mentioned the conflict between what central planning wants us to do and what might be good for Lakewood with respect to the lack of middle income housing and the propensity of the initiatives taken by those we don't get to vote for to impose a system which would concentrate more lower income residents in Lakewood. I don't see a great opportunity on the immediate horizon to stifle the legislative initiative in that regard. However, put my lawyer hat on for a minute, I think there may be some legitimate reasons to legally challenge that. There's a very foreseeable consequence of that because so many greater percentage of folks who are ethnic and racial minorities are in those lower income categories. What that is going to do is create de facto segregation of housing and concentrate those groups in specific areas disproportionately. And that's not a good thing. Lakewood has had less of that than many places, and this would reverse that, and I think it'd be destructive. With respect to South Sound 911, be very careful. South Sound 911 is going to have a $24 million fund balance based on the fact that pressure from County Executive Dammeier saved $20 million on the building. So they had cash flow that wasn't expected from this 1% and robust sales tax receipts. They could essentially do every third or fourth year free. They have Pierce County and Tacoma are working cooperatively to try to unify, create a single system, and meetings are ongoing and making progress in that regard. South Sound 911, by the way, has no expertise, no operating radio system, and no assets for a radio system. So they'd be building something entirely new with no experience, which is dangerous right now. Radio system is functioning, the calls are getting through, and South Sound 911 is struggling with staffing on its dispatching. So I would suggest with their swimming in money, and they should focus on making sure the dispatching, the critical no-fail function that they're tasked with performing is performed well, instead of saying we've got a pot of money, let's see what we can do next. Also, there's a charge for the radios that South Sound 911 could easily subsidize down to zero. The annual radio costs. The tax is a countywide tax for communications, and yet South Sound 911 could use some of that surplus to buy our radio charges down to zero, buy them down for everybody in the county, and still have plenty of a reserve. So there's some real financial management questions going on. So that's all I had. I will be traveling back from Maine next Monday, so I doubt that I will be available during the window where the meeting's being held. So see you in 2 weeks.
Very good. Thank you very much. Mr. Boki.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I attended the Lake City Neighborhood Committee meeting on Thursday night, in nice attendance. Couple of big things, or a couple of interesting things. Really very poignant celebration of Officer Devaney's retirement. I mean, just the appreciation that group of folks have had for all his work through the years as their neighborhood deputy was touching, and he made very nice remarks about the support that the community has given him over the years. And he's been here a long time. I think he came with the police department when it started. Chief Sharp was there, and he did a very nice job of explaining the fire. It's very similar to what we heard that at our meeting from him. And I appreciate the city manager sending us information on what was going on, updates, and how the folks were being helped, because there was an expression of people did want to help. So I think it cleared a number of things up on that regard. There's at least one person with some amount of frustration over the road work. I mean, they're right there in front of, they're doing the section now right there in front of the fire station. So, and it was torn up. It was down to I mean, they did have gravel, or big gravel. I note that Angle Lane is done. The sidewalks are in there and I'm reminded that when a million years ago, when I was on the Citizens Transportation Review Committee, and this was 2001, 2002, Bill Larkin, who was the first Public Works Director, brought to us an idea to put in sidewalks on that, but there was no money and there wasn't any plan. And so we didn't act on it. He just brought it up because he said, well, there's a lot of people that walk to the park, which made perfect sense, right? But we had the money we had and you know, that wasn't something we recommended. So it's done now, Bill. I believe he passed away years ago. So these things eventually get done, and I think we can be proud of that at least that portion's now done. So thank you very much.
Very nice. Deputy Mayor Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have an opportunity to meet the new community connector, Colonel Gallo. And I was happy to meet them, listen to them talk about their trip back and share with them what we have going on here in the city. I did attend the Saturday dancing in the street crowd. The crowd was small, but it was great. In fact, it was really small. They sold 12 beers. But everybody had a good time. It was a lot of fun, a lot of kids were
Good.
there.
Great.
And that was helpful. I do plan to attend the Springbrook Summer Celebration on Saturday. Yeah, and so that's it.
Do you have a comment? Oh, very good. Well, thank you. Just a few updates. On Wednesday, as the deputy mayor indicated, we did have a nice meeting here at City Hall with the city manager. We met the 2-2 Stryker Brigade Commander Colonel Gallo and his Sergeant Major and one of the captains. I don't know if he was the S1 or of the brigade, but it was great to meet them. They have, of course, come back from Korea. We talked about doing our, I don't want to say annual, but semi-annual opportunity to do the meet and greet with spouses at Thornwood Castle. That's something that we have done as a council with spouses and the brigade team with their spouses, usually once a year. So hopefully we'll get that coordinated. More to follow on that. Maybe September, October-ish. We're working to get a date, so we'll let you know on that. On Thursday, as Mr. Caulfield indicated, we hosted here at Lakewood City Hall the group of mayors from the South Sound and city administrators or city managers to review and discuss where we are collectively as a group based on our individual experiences on public safety issues of interest. Things that bubbled to the surface, of course, were the issue to further address the ability for police pursuits in appropriate circumstances, such as property crimes, stolen vehicles, issues with juvenile crime, which is interesting because we have seen a rash of knucklehead activity with juveniles. And one of the challenges is police officers can't even stop and even if they were to properly detain, they can't interrogate or talk to them before giving them the opportunity to have counsel present. So it makes it really challenging. So they all want to kind of address that. Recruitment and retention of officers, working to try to streamline the academy experience, perhaps greater funding through the state was one of the issues that bubbled to the surface, and a few other issues that you're well aware of. So the next step includes the identification of a subcommittee, which raised their hand to meet, and Mr. Caulfield will coordinate that. Typically, it's going to be city administrators and their chiefs or city managers and their chiefs that will gel these concepts for the electeds to review as part of our collective legislative agenda. It will lead to a meeting where the mayors will invite our legislators in Pierce County to review with us our collective voice on these issues, and hopefully we'll make some progress. So I thought it was a good meeting. And others communicated to me that they thought it was a well orchestrated and a good event for them as well. On all things Infrastructure, I too looked at the Angle Lane sidewalks and even more of interest to me, the pathway that is roughly parallel to Elwood. It's beautiful. I don't know if you've had a chance to walk down that or run down that. It's really, really nice. And I was with a bunch of people this weekend and they commented that it almost puts you in a totally different place because it's beautiful tree coverage. It's shaded. It's really, really well done. And I'm very proud of that kind of work that we continue to do for the benefit of the residents. So anyway, that was great. As we know, we talked about funding the Dolly Parton Imagination Library in partnership with the Rotary Club of Lakewood. As a result, you probably saw the little video clip. Dolly Parton herself is coming to Pierce County to say thank you to the entire state of Washington because all counties were able to stand up a Dolly Parton Imagination Library branch, if you will, for lack of a better term. And so that event will be tomorrow. I was invited to that. It's tomorrow at the Pantages Theater around 2:00. I'll let you know how it goes. It should be a very fun event. So I'm looking forward to that. Say again? There were a certain limited number of tickets that were given to the sponsors of the local Imagination Library. And so Lakewood Rotary got a few tickets. And so since I was, involved in that, I guess I got a ticket. If there are extras, I will let people know if they're available. I'm sure. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I will check actually with Bill Potter. He's coordinating the ticket deal. So that is all I have for the good of the order. Thank you for your attention tonight. Thanks staff and Mr. Caulfield for good reports and overviews tonight of important topics. And I'll see you next week. We're adjourned.